Hello, David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome back. I think I'm going to pour myself a drink for this one, a little Blackwell rum. You know what? Why not? Friends here, pour yourself a drink while you're at it. I think this will be a good one. Long time in coming. Cheers. You know, I'm getting rum notes in that. Kind of a rum aroma, a rum aftertaste. Tastes like rum. Anyway, what a nice entry. If you know, you know. What a nice entry into discussing 007 Road to a Million. And we're going to break this apart in different sections. So stay with me on this one because, of course, it's not going to be incredibly short. I'll try to not make it too long, but I want to give my point of view, my opinion, my review of the series, of the 8-part series. And I have to start by saying I was one of those people that was excited about the idea of this. I know when many moons ago, when they released the applications, the 007 applications to be a part of the show, I filled it out. Then I found out you had to be in the UK. I unfilled it out, but I was still excited about it. The fact that they could get Bond fans from all around the world together to compete. And I couldn't wait. I know, I'm not even a reality show person. It's not like I sit there and I watch The Bachelor or The Golden Bachelor, what have you. I'm just not one of those individuals. I've seen reality shows before. It's not like I don't know the formula and what they're all about. High amount of editing, small amount of reality, even in the name, reality show. But I was very interested. And then I was also that rose-colored glasses person that when the trailer came out, the multiple trailers, and even for Global James Bond Day, I was excited. I'm like, this is it. This is something to stave off the hunger, the thirst for James Bond until we get a movie. And there's a but. Yeah, this didn't quite make the grade for me. So if you want 2 minutes in, if you want a quick review, didn't quite make the grade is probably a review, but I want to break it down for you. First of all, I'm going to start out with the positive. Like this rum. Sweet mother's milk. That's not one of the tasting notes, by the way. What do I like about this? There are some things that I absolutely like about it. First of all, the music. We've all talked about the music. And when I'm saying music, I mean specifically the David Arnold opening. The whole opening is great. The visuals behind it, the way it moves, I think it syncs and integrates very well into the Bond lore, into the tropes that we know so well with James Bond. It feels and sounds like James Bond. And David Arnold's take on it was, I'm just going to say it. It was sublime. And I'm sorry, I'm one of those David Arnold not apologists, meaning I don't think he can do anything wrong. He's a fan. He's a fan that hit it big time by doing all these things and being a professional, and he's just a regular guy. So you just want the best. You want him to succeed, and he does. And I think that I love that Eon and Amazon Prime have pulled him back into the Bond fray because that's where he belongs. That's where he deserves to be. I did like the locations. I like the locations. James Bond is all about globe hopping. And when James Bond can globe hop, it's like I'm on vacation. It's like I'm escaping and taking a break from my everyday grind. And that's some of the best things about James Bond. So it feels like James Bond when they jump to different locations. And of course, they used James Bond locations, Chile and Scotland and Italy, and the list goes on, the Alps. So in that regard, the locations were fantastic, and the locations were really highlighted incredibly well because they were done in a very cinematic way. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to argue that it's not cinematically beautiful. It's well shot, the drone shots, the overhead, the helicopter, the airplane shots, however they got these shots. I think there was, in the press kit that I received, there were multi-camera shots all around. So that was very interesting, and it gave us a very cinematic view. Even the aspect ratio The quality of the film, chef kiss, all there. The other thing is, and this is a big one for me, because you've probably seen just a few, and there may be one or two more yet to come. You've seen my interviews with the contestants. Now, this is a confessional moment. It's like an MTV confessional moment. When you connect yourself to any aspect of like a press junket or a party, or if you have a familiarity with individuals that are part of a project, you can't help but be biased. I'm sorry, those of you that say, no, I'm not biased. I'm not biased because I went here. You do, you get biased. You can't help it. And I'm just being very authentic with you. If you're part of a party or a launch, there's a dopamine thing that elevates. And it's not the elite aspect of being a part of that. It's more around that you want people to succeed. You feel like you're part of that little tiny cog just for a moment. So I've interviewed several of the couples of the contestants, and I've got to tell you, I really like the contestants. I like them all. They're not irritating. I think some, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, have a smaller limelight coloring than others. But I really genuinely like these individuals. They're very likable. They're approachable. They embrace the world of James Bond. And because of that, I think this is one of these things where everybody can agree that the contestants are a highlight. You want to watch them. You want to be on the journey with them, and you want to see them succeed. You root for certain ones, as a matter of fact, even when the Bones brothers can't quite get the rum tasting notes. They do, eventually. But the good news is, continue with the good news, is the Bondian aspects build. There are people that have only seen one episode, some who have seen half an episode, 1.5 episodes, 2 episodes, and all 8. I have obviously seen all 8. I wouldn't go into the interviews of the people without seeing all 8, but I was really curious to see if the Bond moments, the Bond tropes actually ramped up or ramped down or stayed neutral. And I'm happy to say that they did ramp up over time, because the first 2 episodes, and here comes the first part of the review, seemed a little thin when it came to James Bond. In fact, I lost my wife Danielle after the first 2 episodes. Not lost like she's gone from us. I mean, she just didn't care to watch any longer. So, and I've heard that from a lot of people. The first 2 episodes seem to have lost them. So there is a bit of a red flag moment that I'll raise. Pacing. We've got to talk about the pacing with this, because I think that there were some winning pacing moments, quick cuts that really show the adventure and the excitement around James Bond. And then there were those, unfortunately, that just slowed everything down. And the crazy thing is that when I spoke to these contestants, I found out that the scenarios that they were put in, the angst and the obstacles, were actually more exciting in some cases than what wound up in the episodes themselves, which makes me scratch my head. But then I realize something that I think a lot of people should realize, and that is creating a reality show is almost an impossible task. You get all this film and all this footage, and you have to whittle it down. You have to whittle it down to something that is definable as a story. You've got to be a storyteller. And the problem with storytelling is that you've got to have characters, you've got to have plot, you've got to have details, and if you don't have that, what are you making your story out of? So the pacing itself, I believe, at some times slows down. For example, in the first episode where they are in Scotland and have to wade through water and go through water and climb mountains, not the most scintillating James Bond send-off and beginning that you want to do. And in the end, and here come some spoilers, so if you haven't seen it, you want to see it, you want to shut this down right now. Come back up. Hello, how are you? But in the end itself, when they were doing the rifles, the laser rifles, it just seemed like it went on a pace or two too long. I understood the detrimental consequences of not making the shot, but it just seemed to go on, almost like they didn't have enough footage for that area, and yet I'm sure they have hundreds and hundreds of footage. A part of that gets to one of my largest complaints. These were Amazing Race dangerous missions. But they're not dangerous missions. They're dangerous moments. They're sort of, it felt like they were cobbled together, as opposed to James Bond. In the James Bond world, he goes on missions. He gets goals that he has to attain and collect and information and use that information for data. And unfortunately, this show didn't really capture that moment of a mission. I would love James Bond to have a mission, but that didn't happen. Now, I mentioned the contestants before, and I think one of the exciting things that I don't think I'm going to blow the lid off of any story, but it needs to be communicated to people. There was a lot of discussion in the Bond community that why did they choose non-Bond fans? I mean, these people are not mentioning James Bond. They don't recognize a DB5 or a Rolls Royce. Where did they get all these non-Bond fans? They're not fans, right? That was the vernacular, if you will. But the reality is twofold. First of all, it's important for you to note that none of the people that you see in this first series applied for a James Bond reality series. It wasn't. So all those press things that went up that I got excited about, I don't know, maybe that's for series 2, but series 1 was for 2 years ago when people applied to an adventure show. And those individuals were marked sort of by us and by the editing as not Bond fans. They are. In fact, here's the crazy story. All of the people that I spoke to, all the contestants, they did recognize the Bond moments. But when they called out the Bond moments, like I believe it was Beth, or Jen, I think it was Jen actually, who found the Spectre ring in the last episode, she actually says, and remember saying, oh, the Spectre ring. They recognized the DB5 as James Bond's DB5 and calling out all the James Bond moments. But they edited those out of the show. So the contestants recognized it was James Bond, spotted it by the moments, the callbacks to James Bond in the show, like Skyfall moments, like GoldenEye moments, and yet it didn't make the final cut. It hit the cutting room floor, and I'm scratching my head. Why? Because all of those moments where people would break out of their everyday persona and then call out a James Bond thing is what would have made this James Bond. That's what makes James Bond James Bond, is these wonderful tropes that are familiar and recognizable and nostalgic to you. And I think what happened was the showrunners decided to apply a veneer with music, right? With a couple hidden Easter egg moments, but they never called out, for example, you're in Scotland, just like Skyfall. Why wouldn't you have intercut scenes either with the movie or have the participants call that out themselves or discover those James Bond moments? To me, this show could have been all about the revelry, the re-embracing, the reconnection of James Bond to the rest of the world. And I'm going to really fly in the face of a lot of people's opinion in this aspect to it. I don't cotton to the fact that they were just going out to bring in new fans or going out to non-fans. I think this could have and should have applied to everybody, but reawaken the James Bond fan in everyone. James Bond films have made billions of dollars. So it's not just the David Zaritsky's that are going out and loving these movies or moments or James Bond institutions. It's outside of that. So if you're going to attract them back to that type of love, you've got to reawaken these tropes. So the question I've got to add is, is there better storytelling that needs to be done in a situation like this? And I would say yes. I think that the editing of this or editing of the challenge, the really question you have to ask is it reality, like in a reality show, or is it mere editing that's creating those moments? And I think that's where it comes up short. So a little sip on this for a second. I think you're getting my review and opinion pretty clearly. The whole show seems a little strange to me. It just does. And again, this is coming from a guy who wanted to love it, who wanted to like it, that followed every path of the moment. But it feels strange because it's a James Bond show that doesn't want to acknowledge that it's James Bond. Yes, they have the moments that are applied, You know, they're almost like little band-aids or moments that have a hint that it's James Bond. But I don't get the feeling like this is a group or a show that wanted to put James Bond on a pedestal for the rest of the world and say, see, this is the excitement and escapism that you've been missing. I just do not get that sense. The tropes are missing. I mean, much of the tropes, the gadgets, it appeals much closer or relates much closer to, again, these amazing race survival shows as opposed to James Bond going on a mission. And by the way, even when it comes to style, I was one of those individuals. I played a fine Waldo moment with the style. I found the MPL, I found the Omega, I found the Land Rover, I found all these different aspects. The Bogner, the Bollinger wasn't hard to find. I mean, there's all these little brand moments in there. But I felt like even that, if you wanted to call out the brands in there was a moment where they say Bollinger and, you know, Aston Martin. I get that. I mean, but those are kind of the obvious ones. But I felt like there was little style moments that they could have had in a more overt way because, I'm just going to say it, style is intrinsic to James Bond. I do think that there was a moment on during the casino scene where they kind of splashed it out, where everybody got in their accoutrements. And that was a nice James Bond style moment. But I would have liked to have seen that even heightened because, again, that is the trope. James Bond is a very stylized world. It's a very idyllic world. And I just didn't feel like that was always clear. So why wouldn't you call out the Bond locations, the Bond moments? And I've heard a couple people out there say in reviews, well, that wouldn't appeal to the everyday people. How do you know? I mean, I think it would actually be a lot of fun to rediscover James Bond through a reality show, or rediscover it through I'll say the casual fans that they elicited. Not the non-fans like everybody thinks. These people know James Bond. In fact, when I talked to the Bone Brothers, they said as soon as they saw in Rio the gondola, they were like, Moonraker. You know, they were calling out the different scenes. You don't see that in the final editing, but I think that would be a lot of fun. And it would remind the viewer, like, this is James Bond. And James Bond is so indelible, so popular. It has so many fans around the world that even these normal, as opposed to this abnormal, I guess, people, they're spotting James Bond everywhere. That's how indelible, that's how James Bond is sewn in the culture of our lives. But no, they almost said, oh, stop just short of that, or put it on the cutting room floor because it can't go to James Bond. And I don't know if the decision makers in editing thought it would turn people off or it would appeal to a wider group. But I think then don't do James Bond. I mean, if you're not going to want to do a James Bond thing, don't embrace James Bond. But if you're going to do it, go to the hilt. I mean, James Bond has always been about proud and embracing its roots, its tropes, and who it is. So why wouldn't you do that in a game show like this? This almost felt like, I'll tell you what it felt like to me after a while. And this is like maybe the third episode. Skål. Prost. I felt like this was a beta test, right? Almost like, and I know people are theorizing like, oh, this was, and it even says this in the press kit. You know, there was a discussion early on before Eon even got involved. They had the show, then they took it, and, you know, it's not a reskinning, but they you know, wove it into the whole 007 lore. But why wouldn't you actually call that out? And it feels like they were almost experimenting. Like, oh, let's put 30% James Bond and 70% everything else. It's like scientists when they experiment with formulas. You know, oh, that formula didn't work. Let's try a new formula. And I'll get to what I hope and think the new formula should be in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to say that this whole idea of not calling out James Bond in a more overt way fails. Because here's the thing, I don't think this appeals to the mass audience that either hates or dislikes or doesn't want anything to do with James Bond. But I also don't think by looking at reviews and discussions that it's going to appeal to the die-hard James Bond people. So I'm just trying to figure out in this beta test, who is it truly appealing to? And I do think it's a miss with that. Now, we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, Brian Cox. Now, I like me some Brian Cox. I do. He's great. He's a great actor. I know Barbara Broccoli said some wonderful things. Agree with her on that. I mean, he's just extremely established, personable. And I certainly didn't mind him in this role. I think if you're going to put somebody in that role, a lot of people said, why didn't you have like an M character, send them out on their orders? I get that. But if you are going to have Brian Cox, someone like me who doesn't know these reality shows so well, it was so painfully obvious from the very beginning that he was not making the calls. And it's well established later, even during the interviews with some of the contestants, that it wasn't him. And he, on a talk show, said it wasn't him. So again, okay, listen, it's James Bond, it's fantasy. Let me just, reestablish my line of imagination, and I'm fine with that. But what's his motivation? I always say bad guys are as good as their why. Elliot Carver, arguably maybe not your favorite bad guy, but he even talks about it in Tomorrow Never Dies. He goes, it's not the what or the who or the where, it's the why. Why is the controller doing this? Is he just a sadist? Is he just mean? But is he not mean? Does he have a Grinch heart that needs to grow 3 sizes that day? I don't know, because he has these wonderful warming moments like, oh, I like them. Is he being sarcastic? Like, I never get a real feel for the controller. So when he shows up to do like expressions like, it almost feels abrupt. Like it took me out of it for a moment, and then I was there with him, and then I'm back to the show and I'm like, oh, that's right, wait. So it didn't feel like it was seamless. It took me out of the story. And the best James Bond, anything, whether it's music or products or movies, novels, once you enter into the story, you don't want to remove yourself because it breaks it apart. And that's the worst thing you can do in storytelling, is to come out of that moment where you're a character in the story, and I did it. And so even with Brian Cox, it kind of disconnected. Okay, so let me take a sip, because I'm talking to now the producers, the showrunners, and yes, all of you as well. I don't want to be one of those people that just sits here and complains. Meh, meh, meh. And by the way, I'm glad that this show exists. So I'm not one of these people, boy, I've read a couple doozies where they're just like, how dare they, get on with the movie. It's like, I'm done asking for a movie. When the movie comes out, and I'll celebrate it, and I will have the best time in the world with the movie. But I'm not sitting here gagging for a movie. I don't wake up in the morning thirsting for a movie. But I am happy that the world sees James Bond moments in almost any form that it has. The next iteration that comes out around this show, I would love it to be a mission. And I'm going to go further and say, instead of having 9 couples, which I get it, they needed to figure out like who's going to have the best footage. How do we determine out of the 9 couples who's going to be highlighted? And hopefully out of 9 couples, we'll have enough to cobble together 8 episodes. I get how the machine works. But what if you were to have 5 couples? What if you were to have less people, but really focus on them more? And make it about a mission where you have to acquire either artifacts like MacGuffins or pieces of information that build upon each other. And as you accomplish each task or mission, then you get a little bit more information, or you run into different characters in the story. Bring in certain characters from the James Bond world, even if it's not the same actors. Bring them in and have them establish part of the next steps of the mission. Then they're sent on their way, but they're in competition with each other. I know, not everybody completes a mission. And maybe each group is, 001, 002, 003, 004, 005. How cool would that be? So team 005, so we can root for them. It's not that we're having trouble remembering all their names and personalizing them, but it would be cool to make them kind of like, listen, all the 00s are out doing stuff. We need to get plain people to do this mission. You, this group, you're 001. So we need you to go out and go to here. And I'm just going to say it. Enough with the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire cases and questions. I mean, unless they're going to be Bond trivia and Bond questions that the world can answer, it doesn't have to be like David Zaritsky knowledge. I get it. You know, not too many fanatical people out there. But make it so anybody with a pulse who have seen the more familiar ones like Goldfinger and Skyfall, make it difficult for them if you are going to have questions. But I would submit, what if you made it more like James Bond, where they have to accumulate data and information and puzzles? Puzzles that don't come together for each and every moment, but accumulate over time. That's how a mission is. I almost sound like Rocky. That's how winning is. You move forward. You keep getting hit and something, and I don't do a Rocky. Yeah. But that's what I'm craving. That's what I'm thirsting for. And then what they can do is whittle it down to 2 groups at the end, or 3 groups, and they're fighting for that top thing. And there can be only one, like Highlander. There can be only one. There can be only one. And that winner gets the $1 million. I mean, that was the other thing. Spoiler alert. Turn it down if you don't want a spoiler alert. There was no $1 million winner. There was no $1 million prize. So there was a little bit of deflation. You know, it's like a James Bond film where James Bond's not heroic. It's like a little dialing down of that. And I don't want to do that. Now, the question remains, and it does remain as I'm trying to fix, quote unquote, fix this, or just make it more appealing to everyone. Should Bond fans be picked? And I've heard a lot of people say no. Holy cow, can you imagine watching Bond fans going through this, geeking out over, oh my God, it's the gondola in Rio, and I wonder if Jaws is up there. Can you, folks, that's candy. That is reality candy. Seeing people that love and have passion and embrace James Bond and watching them basically define the viewer's experience by, instead of having pop-ups or little scenes from the movie, imagine you had a Bond fan relate it to the casual fan, the casual viewer out there, what they're seeing. So the storytelling comes from the Bond fan. I know, it's crazy. It's been really pushed back hard over these last few decades. But imagine utilizing those fans to actually roll that forward. And believe you me, the purview that I have of the Bond community and Bond fans in general, you got a lot of characters. You got a lot of personality. So it would be fun to watch. It wouldn't be couples going on a journey of being found or things like that, but you'd have like some pretty crazy characters. You'd have some really interesting connection points. And that's the other thing, bring them together. Imagine where the missions are a race against time or a race against the other 00 groups. And you're doing it with fans and you're showing the world that the passion and the fandom of James Bond is something that can actually be emulated and not harangued. And that's probably the wrong use of the word harangued. I'll look it up later. I'm sure you'll tell me in the comments. But I want to see that. I want to see that struggle. You know, I want to see that connection. And I want to see the reality that Bond fans have to face when they see their passionate hero, their character up on screen versus you trying to be one. There's a great quote in the press kit that I got where the showrunners are talking, and I guess they had a conversation with Ian and they said, pretty much quote, they don't want James Bond wannabes in the show. They said that. They don't want James Bond wannabes. And to me, first of all, I get that. You don't want a James Bond wannabe. You don't want somebody that's going to, run through a brick wall, etc. But you do want people that are connected with James Bond, that have the passion, that have the flow to really show the rest of the world, or maybe even preheat them, that when the new movie comes out or products or anything like that, this is the amount of fun and joy and passion and love that a James Bond fan has for James Bond. Join us. It really is. It's a different way of marketing. It's called emulation marketing, but it's something that I think that the showrunners could truly, truly embrace. Now, let me tell you something. 29 minutes in. By the way, this is delicious. Just saying. Meow, meow, meow. Product placement. There's a lot of discussion of people saying, for the next season, I hope for the next season. The next season's been approved and greenlit. Guess what? When I was doing the interviews, there was only one thing I was asked to edit, and that was the fact that the next season has not been greenlit. Now, when I post this interview, maybe things have changed, I don't know. But as of 2 weeks ago, when I did the core interviews, it was not greenlit. I believe there are things like pre-approvals they're working on, but greenlit means it's 100%, it's there, it's in the bag, etc. So I think it's terminology. I do think it's going to happen, but the fact of the matter is, it's still anybody's playing field. Meaning, if you've noticed, they've accepted applications. I truly hope you Bond fans have applied or are applying for the next season if you haven't, because it would be great. I can't compete. I can't compete because I'm from the United States. Maybe eventually they'll open it up to the international world, but we'll see. But you can if you're in the UK. I hope you apply because I want a Bond fan to be a part of the show. I do. And so everything's green. It's a green field. It may not be green lit, but it's a green field. So changes can be made. I'm hoping that the showrunners, the creators, Eon, take a look at this as a beta. They listen to the fans. They listen to the people. And like Elliot Carver said, you give the people what they want. I think you can please the casual Bond fan all the way through to the David Zaritsky fanatics of the world. I really believe that there's an opportunity to do this. And I want to see this succeed. Again, I was one of those people, I'll bookend this conversation. I was one of those people that I was excited about this. I was behind it. I was supportive. I wanted to do a great review. The press folks couldn't be nicer. The contestants couldn't be nicer. So I wanted to sit here in front of you and just glow, 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 glow. And I can't. I can't. This is not, it wasn't what I thought nor wanted it to be. I was entertained by the contestants' story, but more of that was a conversation with them behind the scenes than what I actually saw on screen itself. So there you have it, my review. And my hope that truly we can get better with this. Yeah, I don't know. I'm an evolution type of person. Things can get resolved. That's just how I think about things. So cheers. Thanks for all paying attention. In the meantime, this has been David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. We'll see you all real soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.